Good Tevach. This is a post-Shabbos Shuva Drasha. For all those who couldn't make it to shul or who just asked for what the shul message was. So here's what we said over in shul today. Parshas Ha'azinu means, the word Ha'azinu, it means when you listen. To listen. Go ahead and listen. So now the question is, a lot of times people hear things and they go ahead and you don't really process what you heard. You know, there's several levels of listening. Sometimes I'm teaching a class and that's one level of listening, like not listening at all, I mean. Then you have the next level of listening, which is you hear what's going on, but you misinterpret it. And finally, you'll have something, you will listen and you will understand what you are hearing. That's the Ha'azina that we have to get to. You know, there was I remember in 2005, about 15 years ago, there was a plane that was from a Greek Airlines, Helios Airlines, flight 340. And what happened was, the flight took, it arrived in the airport, and they asked one of the engineers over there to go ahead and to perform a check on the plane. So in order to perform this check, he goes ahead and he switches the cabin pressure system to manual instead of auto. And he goes ahead, he performs the check, the plane passes. Now, he should have switched the switch back to auto, but he forgot. On 3 separate occasions before the plane took off, the flight crew missed and recorded that all systems were checked. They missed this button. The plane takes off at about 10,000 feet. An alarm bell goes off. The alarm bell that talks about this switch. The alarm bell that says that the cabin pressurization is off. But the captain and the flight crew, not believing that such a problem can exist, ignore it. And they say, oh, it probably means something else. The flight climbs higher. Suddenly, other alarm bells goes off. And the reason is because of this pressurization, now this is not working, that's not working. The captain radios back in, we're having several problems here, a lot of alarm bells are going off. And the ground control is trying to help them out. Maybe check this, maybe check that. The flight continues to climb. The pressure gets less and less. Eventually, this very mechanic, this engineer, goes ahead and says, can you please check to see if I, by accident, kept it on manual? And the captain responds something that's unintelligible, or not responding to the question, because afterwards they realized he was probably at that point already suffering from a lack of oxygen. And they asked him other questions. Eventually, the plane in autopilot starts to continue on its flight path, and there's no sound from the cockpit. So they scramble some F-16 jets, they get up there, and they go ahead and they see the pilot is slumped over his controls. Apparently the lack of oxygen caused him to pass out. They look through the passenger windows, all the oxygen is hanging down. Here's something to note. Apparently the oxygen that they give you on the plane is not enough to sustain human life. It's only enough to help the plane get down to 10,000 feet. It's only enough, so it wasn't going to help the passengers. And the F-16s were looking through the window, and they saw that everybody was out. And the plane was just circling on its autopilot until eventually it ran out of fuel, and it crashed. And all 192 people died. Because the captain, hearing an alarm bell, said, it's probably not a cabin pressurization problem, because who would keep that button on manual? These mistakes don't happen. That obviously cannot be what the alarm bell means. And he didn't process what he heard. You know, I have a friend who's just now going on the way to Detroit. So he asked me directions for Detroit, told him to go to the 94. This guy always goes to New York from Chicago. And New York, you take the 90. Detroit, you would take the 94. This guy got on the 90, his regular path, and he's driving along and he sees, hey, isn't that fireworks store on the way on the 90? I guess there must be something, like every, 50 miles you have to have a fireworks store. Hey, that's a famous ad that we always pass. Isn't it weird that it's on the 94, the same? Isn't that so funny? There must be like this special like advertising agency that all the highways have to look the same. And like, this highway looks very familiar. It took 80 miles for him on the 90 to realize that he was on the 90, not the 94. Okay? So I'm 80 miles, not totally out of the way, but I'm 80 miles. You can still make your way back. But one message after the next message after the next message. If you don't believe that there's something wrong, you're just going to take those messages and not really hear them. You're not going to really absorb what you're supposed to be hearing. You listen to things and you don't understand what they are saying. So of course, we're going to try to bring this into listening to messages about our very selves. We're going to try to say, oh, well, we're supposed to get messages. So why don't we take messages? Well, the answer is very simple. Because it's very difficult to get up in the morning and see a person in the mirror and say, that person, there's something wrong with him. He's not perfect. Because that person is you. You don't want to say that you're not perfect. People have a hard time believing that about themselves. So therefore, they will hear the most amazing, stark, clear messages directly to them and just interpret them differently. Let's say you have an alcoholic. Like a guy like, well, it's normal to lose 3 jobs. It's normal to be fired. I mean, people are fired all the time. I know other people who are on their 7th marriage. I know other people whose kids are. So yeah, a lot of times kids these days, they don't talk to their parents like teenagers, like blame it on the teenagers. You have a person, because the person is not taking these messages and interpreting them correctly. You have another person who goes ahead and loses his temper all the time. Well, he's going to answer. Could you look at them and say, there's a problem with that person? Other people, when they get home, their kids run over to them and say, hey, Abba, good Shabbos. Or alternatively, they'll go ahead, if they're a bit older, and they'll, have a good conversation with you. You have a lot of people have a good rapport with their kids. You don't. Like, oh, it's because I run a tight ship. You'll see. Those kids, you'll see them off the derech in 10 years. Me, I run the tight ship. I run a good house. Really, that's the pshat. Because people will go ahead and they will explain and do everything to make sure that they're normal so that they don't have to look in the mirror and say something's wrong. It's the same thing as the captain. It doesn't make sense that the switch is on manual. That alarm bell must be something else. It doesn't make sense that I'm on the wrong highway. I went on the wrong right highway. It must be that there's this committee to decide that there's got to be a fireworks store every 50 miles. It doesn't make sense that there's something wrong with me. It must be that I'm normal and everybody else is the problem. Or there are 2 valid mahalchim or whatever. But I don't need to take any message. That's the way people approach when we give them a message. So what we have to do is, in order to go ahead and give yourself a message, you have to sort of disassociate from yourself and imagine that you are coming over to yourself and saying, I'm not talking about me, of course, but I want to know about you, meaning you, and what do you think you can improve in? Because looking at you from a third party, well, can you improve in, there's a whole bunch of things that we can improve in. Is there anything, that could be improved with your phone? Are you davening properly? And of course, knowing yourself as well as you know yourself, but looking at it from an objective party, taking 5 minutes out and imagining somebody like you was asking you for advice on how they can improve because they just heard a good shmooze and they want to do Shuva. Now you give this other person good advice. You know what? We both know that there's some things that go on the phone that aren't proper. How about language at the work? Are we good with language at the work? Is that running properly? How about davening with a minyan? How often do we skip minyan? How about davening with kavana? How about benching? When was the last time we said all the words in benching? How about learning? Is that good? Is that up to par? Are we learning with a chavrusa daily? So all these questions that you're able to look at yourself and decide what am I supposed to do? Because you have to disassociate from yourself, and then we can start going ahead and trying to do tshuva. Now, let's talk about messages. Over the last 8 months, we have been struggling, the world, with very strong, clear messages, not only to the world at large, but specifically to Klal Yisrael. I heard from Links, which is an organization that deals with Yisonim, that there were 290 families that were added on to their organization because of COVID. Not because the person had COVID and got into an accident, but because of COVID, there were 290 families. Now, we're not talking about people who died, but rather people who had children who are now considered orphans because one of the parents in the house succumbed to COVID over the United States. Somewhere in the United States this was, or probably UK as well. The point is that we have 290 new families of Yisonim. This is not something that happens from the flu. This is not something that happens every year. This is a direct, stark message to you. And you have to understand that it is to you because, and to me, to everybody. Because when Hashem goes ahead and judges the world, and he's like, I think 70% of the world needs a message, he only brings a message to those 70% of people. And the other 30 people will not be affected at it at all. You will be in a cave in Scandinavia and never having heard of COVID. But instead, if you did hear about it, that means Hashem wanted you to hear about it, because everything that happens is within his will. So that means the message of 290 families was for you. You know, every single time a person's on a respirator, he's this far from death. Do you know how many thousands of people were on a respirator and Baruch Hashem home? That's a message to you. And let's not talk about the people who actually died. The numbers that they gave me, which I think they're a bit inflated, are 2,000 Shomer Shabbos Yidden died. Even if the number is inflated, let's say it's 1,000. 1,000? 1,000 Yidden died? And Gedalim, not only Stam, nobody's Stam. But we know every single day back in March and April was nonstop every single day. That's a message. That was a message to you. And we're talking people who lost their parnasa. If you're a balloon man, you haven't had a job in 8 months. If you you know how many people over the world, they said 500 million jobs were lost. That's a message to you. You have to hear the message. You know who you are? You're a captain. You're a captain on a plane, and there's an alarm bell ringing. And you're saying that, you know, it doesn't make sense that it's for me. So it must be just a faulty alarm. And then there's another bell, and another bell. There were 19 calls that they made to the captain. Another bell, and then you start to lose oxygen, and you start to make wrong decisions. Warning, warning, systems flashing. Those messages are for you. And if we keep ignoring them, then the plane crashes. So now, we have to take the message. The Ramban says, in the Pasuk in Shir HaShirim, it says a Pasuk of Ava Ad Shetechbatz. It says the Ramban, if you have a feeling of love of Hashem, quickly go ahead and make a chayfetz, make a keli, and make something strong with yourself. So this way you'll be able to point to it and say, that's the thing that I had when I loved Hashem. You want to buy a safe or something? I think the same thing applies now. We have to go ahead and make a Kabbalah. If you cannot say what COVID changed about you, then you're that captain in the machine, in the plane. You're the guy driving on the 90. Just keep on going the wrong way. Message after message after message. New York, 70 miles ahead. New York, 30 miles ahead. New York, 10 miles ahead. At what point do you realize that I'm not going to Detroit? Every single person has to know what COVID changed about me. If you are the exact same person before COVID and after COVID, the only difference is that you have a shita on whether you should or you shouldn't wear a mask in public, then there's a problem. You should know that I have this change about me. You know what I have? Not me personally, you know what I have? In the beginning of, somebody told me that he was working on Avas Yisrael. So how do you work on Avas Yisrael? Next time a guy kicks you don't kick him back. But that's hard to like, so you have to wait for somebody to kick you. So what he says is every single day by Moida Ani, he put in the beginning of his siddur, and I'm going to work today on Avas Yisrael. And I'm going to work today on Avos Yisrael. So it makes it a conscious thing, and it's going to be every day. And if he keeps this up till he's 85, his kids are going to ask him, and his grandkids are going to ask him, his great-grandkids are going to ask him, what was that you just said? He says, you know what? A long time ago, it was a weird year. It was a weird year. Now, Baruch Hashem, nothing happened to me, nothing happened to anybody I know, but Baruch Hashem, but L'maisa, I took this upon myself, and I said every day, I try to work on Avos Yisrael. You have to go ahead and say where you're different. And if you can't point to it, then you're not changed. And then you had an alarm bell flashing in your face, which you didn't change. So we said it's very hard to change. How's a person supposed to go ahead and say, person in the mirror, you have a problem? If you look in the mirror and you say, I have a problem, I am a guy who goes ahead and gets angry, I'm a person who succumbs to lust all the time, I'm a person who goes ahead and is constantly jealous of everybody else, I'm a person who badmouths people, I'm a person who has terrible lishonis. If that's who you are and you look in the mirror, then of course it hurts. So you ignore it. We just explain ourselves away. But what you could do is, if you look in the mirror and say, I'm human, I have, my problems, but I'm working on it, then it's not hard to look in the mirror. Everybody's working. What do you mean? I'm a growing person. Then you look at yourself in the mirror even better. You look at you're proud. I'm a working person. You're right. I speak Lashon Hara. But I know from now on I'm learning Chafetz Chaim. You want to know what COVID changed about me? COVID changed that I started to learn Chafetz Chaim 2 halachas daily. That's what it changed. And from now on I'm going to be better in Chafetz Chaim. It might take a couple months, it might take a year, but I'm working slowly but surely in changing my persona, that I'm not a person who speaks Lashon Hara. I look at people better. I become a different person. If all you do is you say, from now on, I'm makbid to finish Sefer Chafetz Chaim right after Shabbos. I have my 2 halachas daily. I go from Chafetz Chaim, Shemiras Halashon, Chafetz Chaim, Shemiras Halashon. That's amazing. Now you can look at yourself in the mirror. Now you can say, you're right, I spoke Lashon Hara, but I'm working on it. That's not bad to speak Lashon Hara. That's not bad to look in the mirror at such a person who's working on Lashon Hara. You become proud. Hey, here's the guy who's working. So you could look at such a person who's that's that. Not only that, it's even better than looking at a person who is just not working, because when you're not working, then you have to use your brain a bit to explain what deep down you know is wrong. But if you face up with the truth that I did an Aveira, but I'm working on it, then you could look at yourself and be actually proud. But it starts with recognizing that there has been a message that has been formulated directly to you. And next time you go to a minyan that requires a mask and you're wearing the mask on your face, don't just say, oh, I have to wear a mask, it's so annoying. Recognize that Hashem is putting something on your face and he's saying, hello, what more can I do to wake you up? Do you actually want me to hurt you? Of course not. Hashem is our Father. He's trying to wake us up in gentle ways. Gentle and gentle and gentle. Sometimes he has to work harder. If we were to all wake up, this would never have happened. These are messages. We're in a Boeing. We're in the captain's seat of all our own lives. The only person who's running our lives is ourselves. It's us. We are the captain. We have a flashing emergency light going on. And if you don't have an answer of what you changed, then you're flying flight 340. This is a Shabbos Shuva Drasha, so I'm trying to get Shuva. But we can do it. We have the ability to do it. And we should do it. How do you do it? Try to pretend. Try to get out of your own self and pretend that somebody else that is exactly like you is asking you for advice. How should I do tshuva? And then try to figure out, do you want to be the guy who's, we said over this story several times, but a guy was going up and down for a minyan in a plane. He says, I'm a kabbalah by myself to daven mincha. How many people daven mincha with a minyan every day? It's difficult at work. So maybe that should be a kabbalah. Maybe davening Shabbos with a minyan every day. Depending on where everybody's holding. Everybody's amazing. You just have to keep climbing wherever you are. So the guy was on a plane, and he goes up and down. He says, can you have a mincha? No, my Rosh Yeshiva doesn't let me daven on a plane. Mincha, I already davened. Mincha, no, I'm davening later. Mincha. He didn't get a minyan. So he says, all right, what can you do? I'm stuck. And he says, Lamaisa, I made a Kabbalah. I don't want to give it up. He starts again at the beginning of the plane, takes out a stack of 20s, goes to the first guy, Mincha, oh yeah, no problem. What happened? I thought your Rosh Yeshiva told you that you shouldn't be davening with a minyan. He only said if it's not disturbing other people over here, I don't see it's disturbing. All right, fine. Mincha, yeah, I thought you davened already. No, I davened yesterday. Mincha, yeah, I thought you wanted to daven later. No, it's fine. No, you need a minyan. I'm saying I'll help you out. Kitzer, he gets his minyan. Most people don't take the 20s. They chapped. They got the message. Point is that he made a Kabbalah. He made a Kabbalah that he's going ahead and davening mincha. And he's a person, he says, if we were to ask him, where did you change? I have a Kabbalah that I'm going to be davening with him. That's me. You have another person. I have a Kabbalah. I'm learning Chavetz Chaim. I have a Kabbalah. I'm learning 15 minutes a day of Torah no matter what. I have a Kabbalah. I'm starting Daf Yomi. I have a Kabbalah this. I have a Kabbalah that. It's got to be ad shetechbatz. You have to point to it. So we don't ignore that alarm bell. We should continue to steig. We should have an amazing Gemara Chasim Teva, a good gebenched year. The Rebbeinu Shalom should be Malek Kol Mishalas Libeinu L'Teva. And we should continue to make the Rebbeinu Shalom happy, have an amazing Yom Kippur and an amazing year.